This podcast is brought to you by the Association for Coaching, the world's leading international professional body, which is advancing coaching in business, society, and worldwide. I'm your host, Maisie Barlow, and in this new series, I'm delighted to introduce you to experts, coaches, thought leaders, and individuals who share their passion for working with young people. Our aim is to inspire and challenge the preconceived ideas we may hold, while dissecting and examining our intrinsic ability to show up for the generations of our future. Raw life experiences shape this series, getting to the heart of why working with young people truly matters. So hello everybody and welcome back. So today we're talking to the wonderful Katrina Weller, who is the founder of the most amazing company, Grow with Grief. So Katrina, welcome.
Hi, that's a lovely introduction. Thank you so much for having me.
So we're going to kick things off by allowing you to tell us who you are and sort of what led you down the path, and maybe just a little glimmer of insight into what this path is.
Big question. Who am I? I'll keep it brief. I'll keep it very brief. Grow with Grief was founded on the basis of my own lived experience. So Grow with Grief is a community organisation that focuses on proactive education around all forms of grief and loss. So whether that be grief through bereavement or grief as a loss of identity, loss of relationship, moving countries, whatever that significant loss is, Grow with Grief is there to support you and also to educate people. And the reason I founded Grow with Grief is, as I say, from lived experience. So at the age of 15, my mum died. And then over the next 7 to 8 years, I lost a further 6 relatives, including my 5-day-old nephew. And this was a pivotal moment, as you can imagine, in my life, especially as a young person. And it was a real challenge. I had a lot of obstacles I had to overcome. And in more recent years, I've learned a lot more around grief, what it means and how that shaped me that I didn't necessarily know when I was younger or understand, nor was I taught about it. And so as I got older, I realised that I wanted to talk about it more and share my story more and my experience. And as I did so, more people were interested and more people came forward and said they wanted to share their experience. And they also shared that they had misunderstandings and confusions around what grief was and what it meant. And they felt validated in hearing another person's experience. And so it kind of grew from that, where I started talking to more people, started going into workplaces, going into schools to talk about what grief and loss is, how it can look, how it can impact you. And as a result, I decided to complete qualifications in providing support for young people who are experiencing grief and loss, but also supporting adults and anybody who may experience grief and loss as well. And for me, it's really about showing that grief isn't all doom and gloom. Yes, it can be really sad and it can be really challenging. It can be heavy, but it can also bring about joy. There can also be moments of happiness, and you can still live a fulfilled life even if you're grieving, and you can learn to live alongside it. It doesn't have to be a sentence that you live with. It doesn't have to be something that defines you. It'll be a part of you, but it doesn't have to be all of who you are. And so that's what we do at Grow with Grief, is we provide tools, we provide evidence-informed strategies so that people know, A, how to support mainly young people who are experiencing grief and loss, but they also understand and know how to support themselves through validation, through acknowledging what it actually is and how it can make you feel. And we do that, as I say, through conversation, through storytelling, and through interactive workshops as well. So that gives a little bit of an insight into how it started. You know, there's lots of ins and outs, but I'm sure we'll go into that, but that's sort of a brief overview.
Amazing. And I know, because I've known you since we were very young, I know that it sort of began with your own podcast, didn't it? It was conversations and having conversations about grief and giving people the opportunity to, like you say, share their experience, which I think is super valuable. Super valuable.
It's amazing the light bulb moments that people have from hearing another person's experience and also being given the space to express their own experience. Often people don't recognise that what they've gone through is a hardship or is grief and loss, and because they reserve it for bereavement, they reserve it for death, and maybe they then don't actually give themselves the time and the validation to recognise, oh, my relationship ended, I am actually experiencing grief here. And therefore, they diminish what they're feeling. They feel ashamed of what they're feeling. But through the podcast and hearing other people's stories and giving them a platform to share theirs, they were able to sort of take back that part of themselves, which I think was really empowering, not just for them who's sharing, but also for the people who are listening as well. And it was magical to be able to be a person that was able to hold that space for them. It was really, truly an honor to be able to do that. I don't do a podcast anymore. I don't have the time, unfortunately, right now to do it, but I still enjoy having those conversations and holding that space for people in other ways.
No, it's beautiful. And I think I've spoken on previous episodes about the intimacy of podcasting and the fact that you are kind of let into quite an intimate conversation, and it can be the first moment that you recognise, as you rightly said, oh, I'm not alone in this. I'm not feeling things that I shouldn't be feeling, or, oh, it makes a bit more sense to me because X is so-and-so is feeling that thing too. So, no, really, really beautiful. So I also know that you've spent a lot of your life kind of doing lots and lots of different work, but there's been a bit of a common thread of working with young people. So you worked, one of your first jobs obviously was at university in a sort of mentorship role, am I right?
Yeah, so I worked in an aspiration raising role, and we went to different schools in the area, and we did either one-to-one support or sort of whole year group support, and we would talk to them about what they would like to do when they leave school and talk to them about the opportunities that were available to them, often with schools and with young people who were marked as disengaged or first in the family, to maybe look at higher education or further education. So often they were young people who didn't think very much of themselves because other people had told them that they couldn't achieve much. And we went in to try and empower them to see that there were options available to them if they wanted them. So it was a really interesting introduction into work with young people, being a student myself and sort of learning that stuff as well myself and kind of learning alongside them. And that's what really sparked my interest in working with them. I actually wanted to work with animals. I was studying zoology, but you know, animals and children, not too far difference. So yeah, I think it was a really nice introduction for me to then lead into more work. And I started working more with aspiration raising, mentorship in a full-time role where I managed my own set of schools and set of students. And when I moved to Australia, I wasn't able to work in schools over here, but what I was able to do was combine my love for conservation and education. And I actually worked in the education department at the aquarium, which meant that, again, I was still working with young people, often young people that were very excited because they were seeing sharks and fish and touching sea stars and all of that stuff. So it was really nice to have interactions with them in that way. And then once COVID hit and I was made redundant and I started doing Grow with Grief, I lent more back into the empowerment work and the educational work and actually working one-to-one on a deeper level.
Yeah, and it makes sense. And it's interesting what you said about the kind of, I'm hearing like a duality going on. So yeah, it's kind of what you were doing and where you were thinking you were heading actually very much aligned with the work with young people as well. So yeah, animals, young people, it's a kind of teasing out of information, isn't it? I'm just reflecting back on what you said about the young people that had been told they couldn't. So actually going in and unpicking something that has almost been an identity that had been given to these young people of, well, you're a naughty one, you can't do this, you can't achieve this. So can you tell me maybe a little bit about that experience and what some of the challenges were when working with these young people that had kind of adopted these labels?
Well, I think the biggest challenge is that they were so embedded into these labels. They had been told not only by their families and the communities they lived within, but also by the teachers in many cases, that they were naughty, they were disruptive, they wouldn't amount to much. And so they really fed into this label. And so it could be quite challenging quite often to break through that. So I would say that was probably the biggest challenge, and addressing the behavioural, because it was quite intense behaviour that would come out. So, you know, I'd go into a classroom and there would be chairs being thrown, table, you know, all of this kind of behaviour that most people would probably just bolt from. And I'd be lying if I said it didn't scare me at times. And there were times where I was like, this is, you know, I have to take a step back. But quite often it was because they had been labelled that for so long. And all you had to do was actually just not give up on them. I think often a child can tell whether you are saying things for the sake of saying it or whether you actually mean it. They've got very good radars for truth and lie. And they also, I was going to swear, but I don't want to swear. So I'll put it as nicely as possible. If you keep showing up for them, regardless of what they do, quite often, again, that's quite eye-opening for them. And that's a real barrier breaker where, yes, you can explain to them whether a behavior or something they do or say isn't appropriate, but you still stand by them and you still show up. And that could be a challenge at times, because sometimes for you yourself, it brought up stuff for yourself. And sometimes you just didn't want to deal with it. You were tired, you were frustrated, you had your own things going on. And so that was a big lesson for me, being a student as well, trying to navigate that. But what really got you through every time is then when there was that one child who had a light bulb moment. And I remember one girl specifically who said, I was told I could never go to university to be a nurse. I was told I can't do that because of where I live. And when she noticed and realised that she could, all of a sudden she opened up and she had all of these questions and she had like such an excitement and she wanted to learn. And her teachers said they've never seen her interact with adults in that way, never mind an external person coming in, but to actually see her excited about the concept of learning and following something that she was passionate about, just because one person listened and actually said, if you want to do that, there is a way to do that. And that's what kind of kept you going even through the challenging points. So yeah, I think that's the challenge, is the fact that they really embedded the label, and to break that down could be quite hard.
Yeah, I can hear that. It makes me think of, sort of attachment theory and the fact that a lot of these young people might not have any other secure attachments, so they're kind of not able to regulate themselves, and they don't trust, even when someone comes in and does show up, it takes time and takes perseverance, is what I'm hearing. And well done you for persevering and also thinking about your own needs in it. I think that's a really important one, sort of being a student yourself and saying, okay, how much can I take on? And it's a learning that we continue to do, is, okay, how much of myself can I give in this situation? And it's really valuable.
And I think removing expectation, we were going in to do a job essentially, and we had an outcome that they wanted us to achieve, but actually taking a step back and thinking, if I don't get them to see that they can achieve something, or, that they can go on to further study, that's okay. But if the only thing they get from this is actually they've sat for 5 minutes and had a conversation with me, or even if they don't show it to me, something still goes in. I think a big thing when we work with children or even just adults, it's really important that we remove the expectation of what we want to get from it and allow them to create that for themselves and the result for themselves. Because if you place too much of a pressure on what you want the end result to be, you're probably not going to reach it, and you're probably, they're not going to get from it what they need to get from it, and B, you're going to leave feeling pretty rubbish. So remove that expectation, especially with young people, and just know they will take from it what they can.
100%. It's making me think about that idea of empowerment, and that it's not about what you want for another person. You're not putting the power into them. You're igniting the power that already exists within them. And something you said about this, when you told me the story about the girl that had just didn't realise that she could be a nurse, or that would be an option for her. It was really making me think of this passion that had just been squashed, a passion that existed within her that had just been caked with mud and other people's opinions. Really amazing that you can unpick it and wash it off and do it with the young person. So your work that you do, a lot of the work that you do with Grow with Grief, you go into schools, you partner with other organisations and things like that. And I'm aware that recently you created some resources, and I was absolutely astounded by these resources that you made. And I'd love for the community to hear a little bit about those, just because I think they're really valuable tools.
Which resources are you talking about? Have you been spying on me?
Which resources? You've made lots. So the boxes that I recall you spending all night packing up and making?
Yes, I collaborated with a friend of mine who also runs a business around resilience in young people. And we were asked to create hundreds on a very tight deadline of boxes that focused mainly on year sixes who were transitioning from primary school to high school and were feeling a lot of grief and loss around that and a lot of anxiety. And so we created a box that they could take away, that they could interact with either at school, that could be teacher led, but also things that they could take home and do in their own time or with their friends and family. And alongside that, it had resources for the teachers and the education staff and also resources for the parent carer. But one of the main activities in this box was a memory jar. And the reason I love the memory jar is partly because I actually did this myself as a therapeutic practice after my mum died with my therapist. And it always goes down really well because what I find with young people is if you try and sit and have a face-to-face conversation with them, it's quite intense. It's a lot of pressure and they'll often switch off or turn away. And so what this memory jar allows you to do is to focus on movement, on creativity, and distracts their mind, and then often it gives opportunity to open up a conversation. So essentially these memory jars are, I'm happy to say what they are, people can do them at home, do them with their children or just do them themselves. So you have a jar that you fill with salt, and this salt you pour into a piece of paper and you use chalk to rub the salt, and it makes the salt a different colour. And essentially you assign a colour to a memory or to a thought or to a feeling, and you pour it into the jar, and you end up, I don't know if I've explained that very well, but you end up with this layered jar of salt of colours which represents something to you. The reason I love this, as I say, is because it opens up that conversation. And if a young person wants to delve deeper into that thought, feeling or memory that they have, then they can, but they also don't have to. And it just removes the pressure of sitting down and asking a person a direct question. It's not as intense. And I do this activity with young people, with adults, because it's a way to connect and it's very creative. It taps into that creative part of the brain, but it is a therapeutic practice that is often used. So that was like a really popular activity that was in there. And a lot of the young people started to talk about their feelings of losing friendships, of losing that security, of losing the stability they had. And now they've got all this homework and scary things and new teachers. So it was a really nice opportunity to do that. And it's gone down really well. It's very popular with the schools. We've had lots more orders come in. And it's just something that is not necessarily us being there, but it's a touch point for them, and it gives them the opportunity. I think the thing I like is that they can go home and talk about it with their families, because we can go into a school, talk to staff, talk to them in the classroom, but if those learnings aren't replicated at home, it's not sustainable. So we really at Grow with Grief focus on sustainable proactive change, not just fly in, fly out and hope that something sticks. We really want it to be reflected across the whole community.
That's so beautiful to think about the ripples that it creates. So, like you say, taking it home, having those conversations with family, because I think so often parents, I'm just thinking about my own sort of childhood, because that's my only reference point at the moment, but going home and, you might have had a really inspiring day and actually mum and dad are busy, so you can't really talk to them about it, or they've got work, they've got things to do, but having something that you can actually take to them and say, look, this is something that I learn at school and this is something that I want to do with you, is a really, really nice way to kind of integrate it into home life and carry on that learning, like you said.
And quite often when it comes to grief and loss, adults don't know how to talk to young people about that topic, because our processing of grief and loss is very different to a child's. And so this activity again allows different ages to communicate on a way that is developmentally appropriate for them, without forcing something, without people feeling uncomfortable, without people approaching it in the wrong way or feeling like they're going to say the wrong thing. It kind of breaks all those barriers down without people realizing, which is quite nice.
No, it's really good. I think it's interesting what you said about adults and children sort of processing grief and loss in a different way, because one of my questions was around sort of language and how do we talk about such big topics? A, how do we talk about it with adults? And B, how do we talk about it with children? Maybe you've got some thoughts on that.
When it comes to speaking to anybody about grief and loss, The biggest thing that I find is that people are uncomfortable, and this is where you get the biggest challenges, and this is where you get a lot of misunderstanding. The first thing that's important to understand when it comes to language is actually the myths out there about what grief and loss actually is and how it impacts us. So most people have heard about the 5 stages of grief, which if you haven't, they're by Elizabeth Kubler-Ross, and the 5 stages are denial, anger, bargaining, depression, and then acceptance. Now, the way that it's kind of sort of been spinned in more modern day is that it's 5 steps, you move through them in a linear process, bam, 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 you reach acceptance and then you're done. But unfortunately, it was never actually intended to be delivered in this way. It was actually, these stages were created when she was actually researching people who were facing their own terminal illness and their own mortality. So these were people who were themselves going to die, and she never intended for them to be used as a diagnostic tool or to explain how people should or shouldn't feel in their grief. Unfortunately, it's sort of evolved into this, and so this, I think, feeds a lot of the expectations that people have about grief and loss. Not only that, it also, combined with society feeling uncomfortable with what they term bad emotions, also perpetuates this misunderstanding of grief and loss. And then finally, the platitudes. Time heals all wounds. It gets easier with time. There's also spiritual beliefs. God only takes the good ones, etc., that again feed into this fear of talking about grief and loss and saying the wrong thing, which then cause people to either say nothing, which oftentimes is worse and can make the griever feel more forgotten and more alone and isolated, or it leads people to just fall back onto those platitudes and just brush it off, which can be very painful for somebody who's experiencing grief. So the biggest thing to remember when we are speaking to somebody who's grieving is grief isn't just when a person dies. Grief is any significant loss to that individual. So that could be a pet dying, it could be moving country, it could be the loss of a relationship. They are all very valid forms of grief. And there's no comparison when it comes to grief. It's not a competing match. Everybody's grief is valid, no matter how similar, no matter how different. The second thing to remember is that there is no timeline. It's not something that ends after 6 months, although there's sort of diagnostic tools out there that suggest that's how it should be, but many people disagree with that. Many therapists and psychologists disagree with that. So there's no end point, and it also doesn't have to look a certain way. And I think that's what the 5 stages make it seem, or films and movies even. It has to be a person wailing on the floor, wearing all black for them to be grieving. That's not the case. A person can be continuing with their life seemingly the same as before, but still feeling deep grief. You can be laughing and enjoying life, or enjoying a cup of tea with your friend and going shopping, and still be experiencing grief. So remembering these things, I think, are pivotal and key before we even look at language, because once we understand this, then it's easier for us to embed that language into sort of our everyday when we are speaking to people. So now we understand that. Another layer is that adults and children grieve completely different because we're developmentally different. Children, different ages, have different understandings of what grief is, what different feelings are, how they're feeling it in their body. Specifically when it comes to bereavement, so a death, their understanding of what that means and how that looks in the world, their place and their impact on maybe a death as well is very different to what an adult feels. And the way they process loss is very different. So adults quite often will feel the big wave of emotion all at once, quite condensed in time. Children, however, their brain is still developing, and therefore it's actually safer and something that their brain does as a protective mechanism, where they puddle jump, where they jump in and out of that emotion. And so you might see that they're playing with their friends 1 minute, laughing, joking, having a great time. Next minute, almost like blink of an eye, they're crying, they're distraught, they're asking you, where is so-and-so, even if you've told them many, many times and explained to them many, many times. And then again, blink of an eye, seem completely fine. And so many times as adults, we think they're not grieving properly, they're not processing it, they don't understand, they've not accepted what's happened. But actually, it's just that their brain is protecting them in a healthy way, and it's very healthy, very developmentally normal for them to be able to understand and work through what's happened. So then we move on to language. And I think the key points, let's think of language in general. When speaking to anybody who has experienced a loss, is avoiding terms that can be invalidating. So things like at least. If you catch yourself saying anything with at least, try to draw back. I'll give you an example. So my sister gave birth prematurely to twins. And at 5 days old, my nephew died. My niece is now 7. Oh my gosh, 7.5. But when that happened, so many people said to my sister, at least you have your daughter still. Now, yes, beautiful for my sister that she has one child that is now healthy and living, but it doesn't diminish the pain and the loss that she experienced when Matty died, nor does it diminish the joy and the happiness that she has that Lily is still there. You can't find a silver lining in grief. There doesn't need to be a silver lining in grief, and often there isn't. So things like at least, anything that insinuates they should have moved on. Don't you think it's been long enough? Don't you think they would want you to be happy? It's really important that we allow a person to feel whatever they are feeling in that moment. And we don't have to have a fix for it. We don't have to have a solution, which is a very natural human thing to do, is to try and find a solution. But actually what's more helpful is sitting back and listening, telling them that it's okay to feel what they need to feel, whether that's anger, whether it's sadness, or whether it's actually relief, whether it's happiness. You know, there's space for all of these emotions to coexist at once. It doesn't have to be either or. So when we're speaking to a griever, just acknowledging what they've gone through. I know that this is hard for you. This sucks. There are no words that I can say. If you really don't know what to say, you can say, I don't know what to say, but I am here to listen. And actually listen. Actually show up and follow through with the things that you've said. With children, it's really important that we use concrete language. And this is something I tell every adult that I work with when in relation to children. So children take things very literally. But quite often we want to shield them from the bad things in the world. And so we say things like they've gone to sleep, they've passed away, they're in heaven. But these are really abstract concepts. And so what can happen is actually we can cause a lot of fear in a child. Saying they've gone to sleep often causes fear around sleep for that child. So they may think if mommy or daddy go to sleep, then I'm not going to see them again. If I go to sleep, I'm not going to see them again. They may think the person's going to wake up and come back because they've just gone for a nap. And so it's really important we use clear, concrete language that can feel uncomfortable and harsh in many cases, but it's actually really important and really, it's a lot safer for that child. So using words like dead and died and explaining what that means. If it's not a death, then it could be, it's just being very clear of if there's been a separation, for example, between parents. Mummy and daddy are no longer living in the same house. This is not your fault. We both love you very much. You will get to see daddy this time. You will get to see mummy this time. And you might have to repeat it multiple times. They might have a lot of questions. And that's okay. I mean, you will probably have to repeat yourself quite a few times. But it's about using that clear, concrete language. Grandma died. That means her body's not working anymore. And you can start to introduce these concepts through things like plants and animals as well earlier on. So looking at a plant, when a plant gets water, a plant needs water to be able to live and survive. And then when a plant doesn't have water, it breaks down and it dies and it stops working. So you can introduce these concepts, but it's really important to use that clear, concrete language. So I know I've just been talking a lot there, but hopefully that gives a bit of an idea into the type of language that we can use.
No, 100%. I mean, it's just gives so much food for thought, and it's really, I think, important for us to reflect on what the differences are and how we use, like you've just said, concrete language. I think the thing that sort of struck me through all of that is this element of honesty. So being able to kind of sit with and be honest about where we're at, where the other person's at, and allowing space for, you know, whatever happens between you to exist. And as you said, not diminishing it is really, really important.
I was just thinking, a lot of the time parents come to me and they say, especially with teenagers, they're not talking to me about it. They don't want to talk about it. I think it's really important to recognise that quite often a teenager will not speak to their primary caregiver about a loss that has happened. They will speak to somebody external, because as a teenager, they might feel very ashamed maybe about the feelings that they're experiencing. They might not understand the feelings that they're experiencing, or they might be feeling protective of their caregiver. And so often they say they're not accepting it, they're not processing it, they're refusing to talk to me. It's really important that we don't force a child to speak about those things. And that's where these creative aspects can come in, these creative therapeutic practices can come in. And also just the element of showing up, because eventually they will open up, but it has to be on their own terms. And as an adult, the worst thing we can do is try to say that we know how they feel. I had a teacher not long after my mum died, who was probably mid-40s, and she said to me, "I know exactly how you feel. My mum died last year." And I was sat there as a 15-year-old, furious, thinking, you don't know how I feel. And even if that had been another 15-year-old, 16-year-old that had said that to me, I probably would have felt annoyed, because every loss is different. It does not matter how similar your losses are. It doesn't matter whether you come from the same family and have experienced the same loss. Every individual's loss is different, and we really have to bear that in mind and remember that, and allow them to have their own grief without trying to put our expectation, again, remove expectations, without trying to put our expectations, our beliefs and our own experience onto them.
Super important. I spoke about it just the other day, that it might have even been the LinkedIn Live that I had a chat with Maxine about this idea of, we don't know how it is for somebody. We don't know what's going on for the young people that we're working with. And I think in today's society, even with everything that's going on with the kind of rise of technology and things like that, like, we have no idea whether it comes to grief or not. We actually don't have any idea. So I think that's a really key learning, I suppose, for us as coaches or people just working with young people, is to take a step back, check ourselves and say, actually, we don't know. So let's just allow the space for them to be the leader and to take this conversation or workshop or whatever it might be to where it needs to go. It's really, really important.
There's so much more going on externally and around them that we have no idea about. And when it comes to grief and loss specifically, there's so many secondary losses. It's often not just that one loss. You know, if you've moved house, for example, not only have you moved house, you've lost potentially friends, you've potentially lost the community that you were in, you've lost your sense of security, you've lost maybe the school that you attended, the routine that you had. So there's lots of other forms of loss that you might experience. The loss of a parent or a caregiver, it could be, you know, they then take on that caregiver role. The loss of identity, the loss of being a child, you know, you have to grow up very fast when you experience loss like that. The loss of friendships, because maybe you feel different or they treat you differently. So it's not just one thing. There's often a whole host of other things that are connected. And then all of the other external things like social media and just generally being a young person in this world today that affect how they're feeling in that moment and what they're experiencing.
Yeah, definitely. I'm just thinking back to what you said about teenagers not necessarily wanting to talk to caregivers as well. And this idea that actually at that stage, you are trying to find your own identity. You're kind of pushing and rebelling against your parents being the ones that you're not so enmeshed with them. You're trying to find out who you are as a person. So I think we've spoken about in previous conversations, but like this idea of like the hormones are raging, things are going on. So actually adding the layer of, and now there's a big significant loss in life. Yeah, it must be incredibly difficult to navigate. Really, really difficult. So it's giving space, isn't it? It's allowing them to feel it all.
Yeah, meeting them where they're at, not where we want them to be or where we think they should be. Just meeting them where they're at and giving them that time. And
that's beautiful.
It might take a day, it might take a week, it might take a year or even 5, who knows? And that's for them to find a person that they trust. And even with all the best will in the world, you could be doing all the right things, but you might not be that person that they talk to. You might not be that person, and that's okay. Don't hold that against them. It's important that they find their person that they can talk to.
So there's something about taking the ego out of being a coach. So being somebody that works with young people, you do have to, like you've just said, you have to remove the idea that you are the one that's going to fix that and not take it personally. So it's almost just letting things roll off you, not letting things stick. So I'm just thinking back to all the guests that I've had on for this series, and it is this idea that you don't have to hold on to, or you can't hold on to expectation, like you've already said, and you can't let what the young person brings sort of penetrate you almost. You can let it exist, but you can't take it personally because there's so much going on for them often that they have to just feel it, and you just have to be there.
Yeah, and you will be a punching bag at times, especially working in grief and loss. Sometimes you'll be a punching bag because you're the first person that has sat down and actually tried to have maybe actually given them the time and given them the space, and that's alien to them. And they're just angry at the world, and angry at themselves and angry at other people. And so you sometimes have to just take it and be the punching bag and recognize that it's not you, that they're actually experiencing a lot of pain. And to be able to remove that ego, as you say, is so important. And that's when you get those moments of breakthrough, of seeing something. It's not often a big thing, but just seeing something slight. It's often very discreet, but if you pay attention, you'll notice it. And that's the magic in doing the work that I think that I do. That's the magic.
And it's being very present, isn't it? It's being so with them that you can't have one eye on the shopping that you've got to do later. You've got to be there. Yeah. You've got to be present, because it just struck me what you said about anger. And, I've done sort of sessions on anger that talk about anger being the kind of overriding emotion, but what exists below or underneath anger, often being so multifaceted and complex. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think that, especially when you look at really like sort of those primary age group as well, is they don't necessarily understand the sensations that they're feeling in their body, and they have a very basic language. So they have happy, sad, angry, tired maybe, and so they'll feel something in their body and they think that's anger, and their understanding of how to express that anger is through words, through behavior, through actions, and it's an energetic release. Anger doesn't have to be a bad thing, but quite often we don't give a young person the space to positively express that anger. Anger is, I think, the first thing that our body goes to. And often when it comes to young people, we just see it as them being naughty. We see them as being rebellious, and we don't give them a safe space to be able to express it. So some work that I've been exploring recently is with a friend of mine who runs a boxing gym, and she's been running sessions for young people where they actually have a space where the first half they talk and the second half they actually have an outlet for that feeling, for the emotion that they're having. Because anger is actually it's a natural emotion, but everybody is so scared of it. They think it's like taboo, they shy away from it and they say it's wrong. Anger is a completely normal, natural and okay emotion to have. It's about learning how to express it in a safe way that's safe for you and safe for others. So when it comes to young people, I think it's really important that we provide that space in a way that works for them. Not every kid wants to hit a punching bag, but how can we transform this into something that's safe but still allows them to release that energy? You have a right to be angry when there's a loss. You have a right to be angry. It doesn't make sense. It hurts. It's painful. It changes your world. It changes the way that you see things. You have a right to be angry, but how can we express it? But quite often, adults say to kids, don't be angry. You're not allowed to be angry. Being angry is bad. And then that's when it becomes problematic, because if we tell somebody something's bad, they feel ashamed of it. They feel they have to suppress it, and then it comes out in unsafe ways.
And it's making me think about our own relationships with anger. But as a coach, as somebody that works with people that will want to express anger at some point, what is our relationship with anger, and how do we express anger? How do we do it safely and healthily? And what are those outlets for us? Is a big question to, I suppose, ask oneself.
I think we have to ask ourselves that with all emotions and with all experiences that we've had, and really reflect and be honest with, when it comes to working with young people or anybody, am I equipped and have I worked through my own feelings towards whatever topic it is that you're working with? For me, have I worked through and done enough work to understand my own grief and loss? Am I able to have boundaries in place so that I'm still going to experience my own grief, and am I able to put those boundaries in place? Am I able to reflect and have the awareness to know when I actually need to take a step back? And is it going to be safe, not just for me, but for the other person that I'm working with? And I think that's a big thing about being a coach and working with anybody, is that self-awareness, because otherwise it can be quite dangerous.
I think so. I think it's definitely something that we need to reckon with. Ideally, everybody that does a kind of a coaching training is in that kind of place where they are questioning themselves. They are really interrogating their own thought processes anyway. But it's hugely important. I think it's something that often comes up. So obviously with the training that I'm doing at the moment, we've been taught that actually our clients will only go as far as we've gone ourselves. So as you say, it's dangerous otherwise. People will sense your resistance. And it goes back to the grief thing. If people are resistant to talking about grief and uncomfortable with that, then it will show up in the work. And the young person, the people, the groups that you're working with will be able to sense that discomfort in you. So it's a really important thing to reflect on. I suppose my next question is a bit of advice from you, really, for the coaches that might be listening. So what is it that you feel, and we've kind of talked around it a lot, but is there anything specific that you feel all coaches should know about grief?
There's no one size fits all, that there's no timeline, that basically everything you've ever heard about grief is rubbish. And I think if you are going to work with somebody who is experiencing grief, especially young people, you need to do some reading on it. And you need to really reflect and think, this is a hard space to work in. Like, every time I tell people what I do, they go, oh my God, that must be so hard. That must be so heavy. And look, it is hard. It is heavy at times. And I think there needs to be an awareness of that. And you need to reflect and think, can I really show up in the way that people need me to show up in this space? And am I informed enough on how grief affects young people, especially because it's very different to how it affects older people and adults and how we process it? And again, it comes back to that. As a coach, reflect on, can I remove my ego from this? Can I remove my own experiences, expectations, and beliefs around what grief and loss should look like, what it does look like, and just be with that person in the moment, whilst also knowing no one has all the answers. And as a coach, you shouldn't think, I think most coaches anyway know that it's not about giving answers, it's about holding that space. But grief and loss is very complex. And as I say, it's not just when a person dies. It's many, many things to many, many different people. And even I, as someone who's now worked in this space for about voluntary capacity and sort of professional capacity for about 7 or 8 years now, there are moments where I even have to sit back. I've experienced infertility and miscarriage, and that's not a space that I feel able to provide support in just yet, in terms of actually working with people, because I'm still working through my own stuff with that. So it's about recognizing that grief and loss there's often a lot of trauma involved. It's very complex. And so if you want to work in this space, do your research, speak to people, educate yourself, and then really reflect on your own experiences of it, because it will come up. It'll be triggering. You'll have a lot of stories that people share with you.
I was just going to say, I think it's only natural, really, that anyone working with people are going to encounter this as a topic. It's going to come up. It's going to rear its head, because it does touch on so many facets of life. So I suppose, as you've said, it's sort of taking ownership of, like, how much can I be that support for this person? Is there something that needs referral out to another professional or somebody else? And just taking responsibility, I suppose, for how much work you've done on it.
And establishing those boundaries internally and externally. At the start, when I started doing my podcast, I definitely did not have any boundaries, and I burnt myself out a lot. And what you find is that when you hold space for people to share these deep pain that they've experienced and these deep experiences, they can't stop. And quite often you can become the person that people just come to sort of dump and then leave. Especially, I'd say not really much with young people, definitely with adults. I found that, sometimes I go for business meetings that's meant to be about business, and they tell me everything and
end up receiving.
Yeah. And I've learned now to be able to switch and be like, okay, I'm in this mode now, and switch quite quickly, and then have to take that time afterwards to sort of replenish myself. But it's really important that you feel strong enough to have those boundaries, because at the start I didn't, and I learned the hard way by burning myself out completely and, you know, impacting my own mental well-being. So again, I think that's something that's really important to reflect on, because it does happen, unfortunately. I'm known as the grief girl here in Australia, in Melbourne now, and quite often, it just happens. And I love, it's an honour. I love it in so many ways, but sometimes it can be really hard especially when you've got your own things going on in the background. So self-awareness and boundaries are like the biggest, most important thing in this space.
Yeah, no, I hear that. I think it doesn't necessarily, or from the people that I've spoken to, it doesn't always come naturally for people in the helping professions, because I think we have this nature, or there's something about us that wants to do the work. They want to help, they want to be there for other people. And I'm guilty of it myself. And I'll, create a space and then go, oh, okay, what was I doing there? Or did I have capacity at that point? So it's really checking in with yourself and saying, do I have the capacity for this? And then how might you navigate if somebody came to you and went, blah, 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 this is what's going on for me? How might you compassionately ask them to stop?
I think it really depends on the circumstance. If I'm already in my role in a school and somebody does that, I kind of just switch and like, okay, I'll take this. But then when I get home, I make sure I really take the time to give myself a bit of self-care and to reflect on that. Usually I text you or call you, to be honest, Maisie, and speak to a friend. But I think if it is a person that I know and I feel comfortable with, I actually have learned to become really transparent. And only recently I had somebody reach out to me regarding infertility, and I said to them, I'm really sorry. I want to be able to provide a space for you to share and talk, but I'm currently not in the headspace to be able to receive this and to be able to provide that support that I want to give to you. Is it okay if I reach back out next week when I'm feeling a little bit better and we can have that conversation then? And I've never had anybody say to me, oh my God, I can't believe you just said that to me. That's really rude. People receive that really well because they see, I think, that you actually do want to listen and you do want to provide that space, and you're actually doing a disservice to them by letting them talk to you when you're not actually there and you're not actually fully listening. So I've got quite good at just respectfully putting up boundaries. Sometimes, if it's been in a business meeting, I'll listen and then I'll kind of redirect the conversation again. And I'll say, if you want to talk about this in more depth, I'm happy to book in a time and we can do that. And then we can really sit down. I think it comes back to that showing that you're not palming them off. You're not saying that, not talking about that. You're actually showing them that you want to give them your full attention, but you can't do it in that moment. And people respect that. I've never had somebody say, that's really rude.
It's like you say, I think it gives the space and the time, doesn't it?
I have teachers say to me, what do I do if a child comes up to me and it's between lessons, I really need the toilet, I've not been able to go to the bathroom for 3 hours, and this child comes up to me and speaks and wants to talk. I always say it's okay to say to them, I want to hear you and I want to listen to what you've got to say. I really need to go to the bathroom. I'm going to go to the bathroom now and I'll be back in 5 minutes and we can have a conversation then. Is that okay? If they say no, you then find somebody else for them to talk to. And you say, would you be comfortable speaking to so-and-so? That's always worked. It's never been a child says, no, I'm not going to talk. But where the issues arise is if you don't explain it to them and you don't explain that you do want to listen and you're coming back to them and you've heard them and you've acknowledged that they've come forward for support. It's very easy, I think, when you're sort of busy as an adult to just kind of be like, not right now. And it's not that you don't care, but you're just preoccupied. But if you can just explain and say, I am here to listen. This is the time when we can do that, when I can really give you my full attention. The person receives it well and they understand and they get it.
And what would the difference be? Because I imagine that sometimes with children that don't, or young people, that there might be a glimmer. I'm just sensing that there might be a glimmer of them wanting to talk, and then there's almost this fear of it being lost. How would you deal with that?
I think if you're in the situation that I sort of mentioned, that like you have to go to the bathroom or you have to do something, like you have to do it. And it's that clear communication, it comes back to that. If the child then decides they don't want to talk anymore, just checking in regularly and being aware and still giving them an opportunity to talk. I've had it myself where I've had children come to disclose things, and when they want to disclose things, you have to tell, and they say, can you keep a secret? And you have to say, I can't, I have to share this. The moment you say that you have to share it, they decide they don't want to tell you anymore. And that's really, really hard. That's really confronting. But you have an awareness that there's something there. And if you continue to show up for that child, if you just keep an eye and keep that open communication, then I've found that often they will come back at a different time. But it's really important that you don't lie. So it is challenging because you might lose that moment, but all you can do is be honest. And as I say, not palm them off, but maybe just explain and redirect and say, can we have this? I'll be back in 5 minutes, then I'm here to listen and we'll find a room. Often that works. But yeah, sometimes it doesn't, and that's unfortunate, but I don't know if there's really a solution to that.
It's really interesting to reflect, and it goes back to what we were talking about earlier, and this kind of truthfulness and honesty and clear communication with young people is, this is what I can give, or this is what I can't give at the moment, and it being okay. I'm just thinking about some of the coaches that might be listening and things that maybe you've used in the past, like exercises. You obviously talked about your beautiful memory jars, which are amazing, but some of the exercises that you've used that you don't mind sharing for other coaches that they might adopt.
With young people, I find that it's often about regulation. So can you regulate them, whether that's through a breathing technique? So something I do with one of the organisations that we work with, they call it hand on heart, and you get them to place their hand here and then you do 5 breaths in, 5 breaths out. And that can be really nice as a way of helping them to regulate. Something we also do is getting them to focus on, we play noughts and crosses with them. So again, it's getting them out of their analytical brain, and that can help to regulate things like, can you count how many red things there are in this room? And getting them talking that way and regulating. So a lot of it is around regulation activities. For us, we're very proactive. So we like to use stories and introduce stories. So especially with younger people, so you're at primary school age again, using books as a way to explore feelings, explore emotions, experiences. That's really nice. There's lots of different books out there. And on my website, I have a list of books that are appropriate for different ages and explore different themes in relation to loss. It's very simple. I don't want it to sound complicated. Things like bracelets. Like we went into a school that was grade 6s, so year 6s, one of the students had died suddenly. And so we went in and made bracelets with a lot of the girls and some of the boys actually. And we said you can make bracelets, the beads represent a different memory for you, whether that's about school, about friends, and actually quite a few of them. We didn't specifically make it about grief and loss, but quite a few of them made a bracelet for this boy that had died and put it on his grave. And so it's not crazy rocket science, but it's just giving that, as I say, it's about holding that space and giving that opportunity and finding unique creative ways that can engage different individuals based on what their preferences are. And then another thing is knowing where you can refer to, knowing the services that you can refer to if you feel there is extra support needed, what support services are out in the community that are easy for them to access, that are free for them to access, that they can call up, that they can go on a chat, that they can make an appointment with, and making sure you have that information to hand, because sometimes that's needed and that's more important than trying to do all of these activities with them. We also play a lot of games around change. So finding different activities and group games that get them thinking about change. So a really simple one that we do with sort of grade 1s and 2s is an egg and spoon race, and with a bouncy egg. And we literally change the rules and we give each group a different rule. So one group has to hop, the other group gets to just walk normally, and another group has to be blindfolded with a friend helping them. And then quickly halfway through, we'll change the rules again. And so we get them to understand how change makes them feel. It can be frustrating, it can be exciting. For some people, change has made them really happy because the change in rules and the change in circumstance meant that they were able to reach the finish line quicker. So it doesn't have to be rocket science. it can be fun and simple. You're not saying to them, we're talking about grief and loss, but it is touching on those aspects. And that's what starts conversations.
It's really important. And some amazing examples there. So with that, I'd be really keen to kind of hear a little bit about how people might be able to reach you. So tell us a little bit about your website. I know there are some changes happening at the moment as well. So maybe I want to give you this time to explain that and talk about that.
Yes, so we are currently in the middle of a rebrand. So as of sort of start of May, mid-May, we will have a different name and our whole look will be very, very different. So just keep an eye out for that. But for now, people can find us through our website, so growwithgrief.com.au. So I am in Australia, but I'm always welcome and open to talking. I do a lot of online stuff as well. We're on Instagram, Grow With Grief. So again, you can reach out on there. We have loads of free resources on our website. I'm always happy to have a conversation if there's anything specific that you're looking for support or advice on or insight on. And I'm happy to refer resources or people that might be able to help. So yeah, the main ones are probably website and Instagram, to be honest. The name will be changing very soon. I'm not announcing the name yet because it is a bit of a secret, but keep your eye out. If it changes by the time this episode goes out, it will be in the show notes, so you'll be able to find the updated name. So don't worry, don't fret.
Don't fret, we will find out. Everyone listening. Lovely. So thank you so much. I always love having conversations with you and speaking at kind of depth about working with young people and grief and navigating all of these big changes that do just happen in life. It's just been really, really valuable and really important. So thank you so much, Katrina, for coming on. I hope that this brings forth some really important and interesting information for the listeners.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you. Thank you for listening to another podcast by the Association for Coaching. For over 20 years, our purpose has been to inspire and champion coaching excellence, advance the coaching profession, and make a sustainable difference to individuals, organisations, and society. To find out more about the Association for Coaching and our member benefits, follow us on LinkedIn or visit our webpage at associationforcoaching.com. Explore our new digital learning hub and enjoy our extensive library of on-demand webinars, signature programs, member benefits, interviews, podcasts, and a portfolio of live events to help you develop and increase your coaching expertise.